Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Basketball Podcast, right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Brice Lewis, and you know what we do here on the podcast. We bring to you everything basketball around the association. Obviously, you know what we're doing today's episode. What we've been doing the last few episodes. We're just going to keep you updated with bubble life. We're going to keep you updated with what's happening in the NBA bubble. And obviously all the stories and news that came out of that. We're also going to have Ethan on the show today to give his insight on the NBA bubble, some of the stories, some of the things about that's happened in the bubble. So it's always nice to have Ethan on here. Obviously, if you want to listen to me and Ethan on a show together for a full show, tune into our Tuesday episodes of the GSMC Football Podcast if you want to listen to us over there. Also, we're going to continue to talk about just, some things, 7 most intriguing player returns during this bubble, some players' thoughts on what the bubble is like. Of certain players will play in NBA trying to address concerns about other things. Obviously, just basically, again, it's just a whole bubble episode like it has been in the last couple episodes. And we're just going to go from there and work with that. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the news right now and start with our first story. The Pelicans. Obviously, one of the teams that are fighting to get that 8th spot, really ultimately the 8th spot, but are currently in the 9th spot or tied for the 9th spot currently in the Western Conference. One of their biggest and most top players have left the bubble for a medical concern. Pelican Zion Williamson leaves the campus for a family emergency. He has left the campus in Orlando to turn to a personal matter. I will read you the update press release that was released by the Pelicans on their Pelicans Twitter, and I quote, Zion Williamson departed Orlando this morning to attend to an urgent family medical matter. He intends to rejoin the team in Orlando for an NBA restart on a later date. We fully support Zion's decision to leave the NBA campus to be with his family, said Pelicans Executive Vice President of Basketball Operations, David Griffin. Out of respect of the Williamson family, we will have no further comment at this time. So clearly, Zion has left the bubble, and obviously we know under the health and safety protocols, players are permitted to leave because of illness or family or emergency without penalty if they receive pre-approval from the NBA. Now, Mark Stein released a tweet a little bit to give a little bit more, because they don't know technically if the NBA is going to permit this, or will Zion have to quarantine when he gets back. And Mark Stein said in some tweets, the exact requirements for Zion Williamson's re-entry to the NBA bubble at Disney World in terms of how many days he must spend in quarantine will be determined once we find out more about Zion's specific circumstances, according to a league spokesman. According to the variables that the league is expected to factor into its decision when determining the length of Williamson's quarantine, where Zion specifically went, his mode of travel, and his frequency of testing while away from the team. Obviously, we already know earlier this week, Rashad Holmes of the Sacramento Kings and Bruno Caboclo of the Houston Rockets reported to quarantine because they accidentally violated the league protocol. So obviously this is a different situation, because obviously I'm sure Zion went ahead and spoke to the guys to say, hey, I'm going to have to leave. I got a family member I have to attend to. Per ESPN's Tim Bontemps, anyone who leaves the campus with approval from the NBA will quarantine for 4 days upon returning under either the following conditions. They are gone fewer than 7 days and test negative for COVID-19 each day they are gone, or they have an extended absence, undergo daily testing and a test negative for at least 7 days before their return. Pelicans Vice President David Griffin didn't specify when Williamson would return to the team. And don't forget, the Pelicans do open up the NBA restart on July 30th, 6:30 against the Utah Jazz. So hopefully they're hoping they will get Zion back for that game. I'm sure of it. So they're going to be looking at potentially will Zion be able to make it back in time? And I think Zion should be able to make it back in time and be able to play. So we'll have to see basically how it all works out, how it all comes together, and just, doing what they got to do out there for the most part. So, we'll have to see what happens with Zion. Obviously, my prayers go out to Zion. Hope everything's okay with him and his family. And like I said, hope he stays healthy and is able to get back as soon as possible. Because obviously a lot of people want to see Zion play at this restart, as he is, again, I've said multiple times, one of the NBA's biggest draws that they currently have in this bubble. Now, obviously this week, we've heard a lot about the line, the snitch line as they call it, has been used a lot to give tips on players, maybe creating violations, or people maybe not liking certain things that are happening. Obviously, they say the snitch line in the report is mainly used for players not wearing masks or social distancing. And in this article, players and coaches are already using the snitch line set up by the NBA to call out those violating protocols inside the Orlando bubble. Most calls so far have been not for wearing masks or keeping 6 feet of distance, according to Joe Vernons of The Athletic. Shams Cardina of The Athletic and Stadium reported Tuesday multiple calls have been placed, and some players have reportedly received warnings for violations. Among those getting a warning was Los Angeles center Dwight Howard, who said someone has told on him for not wearing a mask. So obviously you can tell people are snitching, they're snitching. And they know what they say, snitches get stitches. Obviously, we don't think any hands are going to be thrown in the bubble, but because obviously if that happens, they might just go ahead and tell them to go home. But Los Angeles Clippers coach Doc Rivers obviously joked earlier this week that he was going to use the line to turn LeBron James and Greg Popovich as a joke. And he said, we're going to be the only team left when I'm done with this hotline thing. And then he brought up a question. Would you snitch for a championship? Mm-hmm. I mean, shoot, some people might. The only two players to receive punishment for breaking quarantines were Sean Holmes and Bruno Cabosano, and neither was busted through the hotline. They each must remain in quarantine for 10 days. Commissioner Adam Silver previously said he expected some players to have the coronavirus early on, but that later positive tests would be a bigger problem. We would know in essence there is a hole in our bubble, or that our quarantine or our campus is not working in some way. So that would be very concerning. So obviously, it's made a lot of news, really, because it's just interesting that you have this line here, and players are going and using this line, and basically, saying, hey, if we see something, we won't be afraid to say something or call and say, hey, mask wasn't being worn. This isn't being done. Someone's not social distancing. And so it kind of creates a wider, I guess you could say, situation. And I think that's something that the NBA is definitely going to pay attention to. And we're going to have to see how it all works out. Because I'm sure players are probably going to be like, I can't do anything. If I do anything, I'm supposed to go to say something. So I need to watch it, whatever I do. But in another story, the NBA has sent out a memo to teams about unauthorized people. So the NBA has reportedly sent a reminder to teams about not allowing unauthorized people on or around the Florida campus. Per Shams Cardina of The Athletic and Stadium, the NBA issued a memo to all 22 teams on campus reminding them that interacting with or bringing an unauthorized person onto the Disney campus is prohibited. Cardina added that clubs will be required to discuss health protocols with players and staff members during their next team meetings. Obviously, I'm sure just to, be like, hey, these are the rules, guys. Don't forget that. Per Bikalika Andrews, the memo also reminded teams of the rules about wearing face masks, coverings, and dressing appropriately when receiving food, room service, and going through mandatory educational sessions on campus rules. This comes on the heels, obviously, of the 2 players that have already been caught for 10-day quarantine. Credita reported on Tuesday players obviously were receiving warnings. Obviously, after multiple tips were called on the anonymous hotline to report potential violations. And obviously, don't forget, there was a 113-page document that was sent out to the players and staff about the rules that would have been allowed or followed in an attempt to finish the season. So, obviously, you can tell through every story, the NBA is just, it's like they're like, listen, guys, we brought you here to keep you safe. We brought you here to help not have any issues. And you're messing it up. So, you know, you got to make sure you get that handled. You know, so I'm sure, like I said, the NBA is trying to make sure they don't have to deal with potentially a lot of tests popping up because players aren't listening or players are going against the rules because they're trying to still be able to live the life they want to live. So definitely I understand why the league is going out of their way to try to really get these protocols out there and really say what they need to say to make sure they can control it and handle it anytime they can. And then another story. Obviously, we're going through the stories here. A lot of news. An agent on NBA players bringing weed. Yes, sir. The weed to campus. You're asking about the Fight Club, an agent say. Roy Goldberg of the Bleacher Report wrote this article. Plenty of NBA players are likely to bring marijuana to the Orlando bubble for the restarted NBA season. Although, not everyone wants to talk about it. You're asking about a Fight Club, an agent told Marcus Thompson II of The Athletic. There is no testing for a reason. The league agreed to suspend drug testing in March when the league was suspended because of the coronavirus. With the season continuing later this month, the NBA will test for performance-enhancing drugs, but not recreational ones. The lack of restrictions could lead to plenty of smoking inside of the bubble, with former Al Harrington even advising players to bring extra. So as you can tell, players are going to take advantage of this. They go take advantage of this. They're just like, listen, we can smoke that dope in the bubble. Say less. But bring more than you think you're going to need, Harrington said of the marijuana. You might have that teammate that never smoked and might want to try it since they're stuck in the bubble, so you might be supplying other people. Cough. Players in Orlando will be within the bubble for at least 40 days during seeding and longer, depending on team success. Those in the NBA Finals will be there for almost 3 months. There are different options for entertainment, including ping pong, video games, movie screenings, DJ sets, per Shams Cardina of The Athletic. However, the players might need something else to pass the time while they are stuck in one spot. So, obviously, like I said, as you can tell, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in that bubble. Very interesting to see what happens in that bubble. Obviously, you can tell with all these stories, a lot of different things are happening. So, it's this bubble thing, man. I feel like we're going to have a lot of funny stories coming out. We're going to have a lot of funny stories coming out. A lot of funny stuff happens in this bubble, and you could just tell it is, bro. It's going to be good. Good, I'm telling you. So, definitely, till the game start, it will be just interesting to see just the little stories that leak out here and there. So, to me, we're gonna have to stay tuned and see what happens. But coming up next, we're going to get to more NBA news and topics concerning the bubble, and also which players that you might want to keep an eye on in the bubble. All that here and more on the podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we discussed Zion Williamson leaving the bubble for an apparent emergency family matter. So we'll have to see what kind of details that we get in the future, and that will help determine how long the NBA will have him quarantined when he does return to the bubble. Also, we discussed the NBA hotline, bubble hotline, that's been catching some traction. You know, just giving some initial thoughts on things that have been happening, what's been going on with it. Because obviously that's been a very interesting situation. Just hearing it, seeing what's happening and everything like that. We also discussed the NBA sending out a league memo, trying to, you know, basically reiterate the rules, make sure people are on the same page, and make sure nobody's committing violations egregiously. And then we also talked about the NBA basically, since they're not testing for weed, basically players are like, listen, we gonna be on that gas, baby. while they chilling in the same place for a while, so it will definitely be interesting to see how everything turns out. But now we're going to get into an article written by The Ringer. The NBA's 7 most intriguing returns. We're going to discuss all the players here. And these are the 7 players they think are the most intriguing, and I'll give my thoughts on them. So we'll have to see how it goes. The first player on this list is Ben Simmons. Obviously, Ben Simmons, when the NBA pushed pause, and I'll read the article a little bit through each player, and then also gives my opinion mixed in. So if you see me stop or I don't finish out that portion, obviously I'm not going to read the single entire article. This is a pretty long article, so I'm going to read portions of it while also giving an opinion, so we could also get through this in the segment as well. But when the NBA pushed pause, Simmons had missed all but 4 minutes and 44 seconds of Philadelphia's 10 All-Star post-break contest. Thanks to a nagging nerve impingement in his lower back, he probably should have missed that 444 against the Bucks too. He missed the previous game with lower back tightness and was originally scheduled to go back to the locker room for treatment before it tightened to a point that he finally hit the bench for good. We forget Ben Simmons had that pinched nerve, basically. And so there was questions he may not make it back till the playoffs potentially. Maybe miss a couple of games in the playoffs, because you never know with those types of injuries. With nerve injuries, you never know how long, and then it could be re-aggravated, and just there was a lot there that was just like, listen, if Ben missed some games, the Sixers might have been in trouble. But obviously with the NBA's pause, it helped that he could now get healthy and get himself 100%, because that's one thing that usually happens, is now he's healthy and he's ready to go. You know? So obviously this really helped Ben coming back. But continuing on in the article, Simmons had the opportunity to heal and bulk up to the point that he says he feels even better than he did at the start of the season. That's good news for a Philly team that went 6-7 in games, that Simmons 5th in the NBA in assists and one of the best league perimeter defenders, missed or had to leave early. And that lacks a certain kinetic weirdness in the absence of one of the league's true happen all-stars. Philadelphia's early practices in Orlando have produced some potentially good news. Brown has begun slotting Simmons in at the power forward rather than point guard, that's the spot he's occupied since his NBA debut. Putting Simmons next to Joel Embiid up front would necessitate returning Al Horford to the bench, a move Brown made just before the All-Star break to try to ease the offensive gridlock the Sixers suffered whenever the Titanic Trail was on the court. So obviously, if you remember, the offense was a little stagnant with Horford, Simmons, and Embiid on the floor. Obviously, with Simmons needing the paint, Horford basically being in the paint, even though he could hit the mid-range, and then Embiid, who dominated better in the paint, it did kind of slow down the offense and mess the offense up. So that obviously was a bit of an issue. But it also makes space for new starter Shake Milton, who shined when Brown put him into the rotation in late January and soared into a stratosphere when given a larger role after Simmons' injury. The second-year guard averaged 17.8 points a game, 4.1 assists, and 29 minutes from the Bucks game on, making multiple three-pointers 6 times. Even if Milton doesn't shoot 60.4% from three-point range in the new-look starting five, he's still another credible shooter, ball handler, facilitator to the lineup, and could open up more room for Embiid to go to work on the block, where he's averaging 1.2 points a game per post-up. So obviously, listen, if Simmons really works out the power forward position, this could be big for them. This could be big for them because Simmons really can excel in that spot, and he can really excel in that position. And if that happens, then that's going to put them at a better point. Because honestly, the offense just looks so stagnant with all of them on the floor. And we can't forget about Josh Richardson and Tobias Harris. If Philadelphia can get that easy, free-flowing offense going, they might be a team that can make some noise. I do think if they had the playoff standings stay where they were, the Celtics would be a bad matchup. But if they could maybe get a Pacers team or something like that in the first round, I think that definitely would help them really hit their stride and maybe make them a very interesting dark horse team potentially in the Eastern Conference playoffs. Now, obviously, like I said, Milton, Tobias Harris, Richardson, you got Simmons and Embiid. They could do a lot of pick and rolls with that. But continuing the article, that 5-man unit hasn't logged a single second of game action this season, and you know Brown is gritting his teeth a little about moving away from a starting five that, for all its warts, outscored opponents by 9.2 points per game behind a polarizing defense. But the idea behind splitting up Embiid and Horford remains sound, and if the shakeup taps into the new vein of Simmons' mammoth potential, it could go a long way towards making Philly the fearsome playoff combatant many projected it would be all the way back in October. But now we're going to get into the next person. Jamal Crawford. Obviously, Jamal Crawford hasn't played since he dropped 51 points in his final game of the 2018-2019 season with the Phoenix Suns. So, obviously, him coming back to the Nets, a lot of people think it's a very interesting situation to see, you know, what he's going to look like in the bubble and how he's going to play. Obviously, in this article, I get why Crawford I get the why of Crawford, who famously poured in 51 points in the final game at age 39, going the entire pre-hiatus campaign without working his way into an NBA roster for the most of Crawford's career, which began 1 week before hanging Chads. His teams have posted a significantly worse point differential during his floor time, thanks in large part to Jamal being a real Bill Murray and Space Jam vibe onto the court. Combine those with defensive failings with a consistently subpar shooting efficiently. That last time Crawford turned in a league average efficient field goal percentage, which accounts for three-pointers being worth more than 2, was 2013. And you can understand why devoting rotation minutes to a 40-year-old Crawford, even with all those highlights and all that hardware on his resume, might not appeal to an NBA team that's trying to build something bigger. But obviously, if you look at the Brooklyn Nets situation, you know the situation they're in. They don't have anyone. They have to do this. They don't have anyone who can really come into this position and really take over. And that's why they're looking into that's why they're bringing in Jamal Crawford, because they need someone who can put up buckets, who can score, who can make things happen, because they don't really have anybody else who can do that. And especially with Kyrie and Kevin Durant out. So obviously, I think this is a very smart move for them to go and get Crawford, bring him in there. And if Crawford wants to play next season, can even show people, like, listen, hey, I could still do something. You could still make me a part of your rotation. You could still make me on your team. You don't have to keep me away from the league because I can play. Because, listen, at this point, Everybody knows Brooklyn ain't doing nothing. You would almost say they're just taking time, just killing time right now till they get to go home. So we'll have to see. Next player on this list, Andre Robertson. I know y'all haven't heard that name in a while. I haven't heard that man in a while. But in the article it says, I'll be honest, I wasn't positive that Robertson was still on Oklahoma City's roster. I wasn't sure either. Shoot. But I knew he hadn't seen game action since rupturing his patella tendon in the left knee while trying to catch an alley-oop during a 2018 game against the Pistons. I knew that every now and then you hear something about him continuing to work his rehab with an eye towards working his way back to the court. But as the Thunder pivoted away from its past and towards the future with teaming and with possibilities during a surprising and delightful season, I kind of lost track of his whereabouts of the former all-defensive second-teamer. And then, as Oklahoma City prepared to head to Orlando, rookie wing Legwitz proclaimed Robertson was ready to go, and when the Thunder kicked off practice at Disney, head coach Billy Donovan said the 28-year-old looked really good in terms of the way he was moving on the court. And suddenly, after 2.5 years, this man has returned to the court. Obviously, Roberson's not a guy, we know his game. He barely gonna give you 4 points a game. But he is probably one of the people considered one of the best on-ball and perimeter defenders in the game today. And that's why he's able to get minutes, and that's why he's able to play. So, we'll have to see how he looks. Obviously, working his way back from injury. I didn't realize he was out that long. It's crazy that he's been out for so long. I'm glad he's back. I'm glad he's able to play basketball again. Obviously, we don't know maybe how that could affect Oklahoma City bringing in a veteran and then a guy who has playoff experience, a guy who, again, is one of the better defensive players in the game. So we'll have to see how it works. And remember, his 3-year, $30 million contract ends this summer. So you know he'll have some motivation to show, hey, I'm not washed up, guys. I can still ball, I can still play, and I can still play at a high level. So you know he'll be interested to see what happens. And the last player we're going to do of this segment, before we get to our phone interview next segment with Ethan, before we return back to this list and other news, is Jurf Nurkic of the Portland Trailblazers. In the article, I highlighted the returns of Nurkic and Jack Collins last week, but I think it's worth underlining just how well the Bosnian center has been playing before he broke his leg in the final weeks of the regular season in 2018-2019. He was one of the just 6 players averaging 15 points, 10 assists, and 3 assists and 1 block, joining Giannis, Anthony Davis, Embiid, Karl-Anthony Towns, and Nikola Vucevic. Nurkic reached a new level as a facilitator in Portland's half-court offense, tweaking, setting brick wall screens to operating as a high-volume hub from the elbows. Only 13 players got more touches per game from that floor, from the area of that floor. Nurkic notched an assist on 17.9% of his teammates' buckets last season, a career best and highest marked of any center in the league. His ability as a complementary playmaker and secondary scoring threat helped fuel Portland's rise to the 4th in league offensive efficiency. So, obviously, people have always been waiting for his return. The offense of Portland has always been even better when Nurkic has played. He really helped that offense really find his rhythm. And it'll be interesting to see Collins, Whiteside, and Nurkic all together to me, to see how all of them work together. Because, that's a pretty good 3-man front court. And then you got Damian and CJ. You got some guys. I mean, like I said, Portland is probably, I would think, one of the most interesting teams in this playoff. People are saying the Pelicans. I'm saying, listen, it might be Portland. It really might be Portland. So we're going to have to check it out and watch out, because it really might be them. We'll just have to see how everything works out. Because like I said, I've always said they will give them more of a competitive advantage, or more of a competitive matchup against the Lakers than the Pelicans would, in my opinion. But that's all we have here for this segment. We'll finish this list in the last segment of the show, and we'll also talk about some other NBA news. But Coming up next, Ethan will be joining us to talk about his views and opinions on what's happening within the NBA bubble. So if you want to stay tuned and listen to that, stay tuned right here to the podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. And we have the man, the GOAT himself, Ethan, returning to the podcast to talk more basketball with me. How are you doing today, Ethan?
I am doing fine. It's a little bit warm today, a little hot in the area, but you know what? We strive to continue on and move forward.
Yeah, definitely, man. It's getting hot out here. You know how it is down here in Georgia. But Ethan, have you been pretty much I'm sure you've heard about some things that happened within the NBA bubble and everything. And I don't know how hard you've been keeping up with it or how much you've been keeping up with it, but you know, it's been interesting, man. The first week, I would say, basically, it's not the first full week, but the first 5 to 6 days the players have been in the bubble. It's been interesting hearing what's been coming out of there, some of the stories. Obviously, you know, the hotline, that's obviously picked up some news recently, since they call it the snitch hotline and everything. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on it. And to start off, I wanted to get your thoughts on basically, you know, the things that were first talked about. So after everything you've heard so far, are you feeling like, okay, so far so good when it comes to how the bubble's working out? Are you surprised by anything you heard? Is there anything that shocked you? Anything like that?
There's nothing that really has shocked me per se. Everything that's happening in the bubble as of right now is stuff that you could see as an easy, predictable thing to outcome. Like nothing is like, whoa, that's crazy. I think one of the stories that was funny was the whole Dwight Howard being the only guy to show up to a DJ party in Disney for all 3 different suites. That's hilarious. I think he went on Instagram Live afterwards and just started jumping on people's random Instagram lives just because there was nothing else to do. So that's pretty funny. I thought the Rashad Holmes thing was pretty interesting, that he went to go pick up a Uber Eats and he got caught and he had to go into 8 days of quarantine because he went and ordered some food. And I don't know, man. I don't think anything really big time has happened yet in the quarantine space. Now, Rondo did get hurt. That's a thing. But Rondo wasn't playing well before before all of this started. And to be honest, since we know what Rondo was, it's not like everybody assumes that we might get a playoff Rondo appearance. But honestly, playoff Rondo may be out the window too, along with real Rondo. So, you know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you know, injuries happen. I mean, there's been a couple players who've been injured so far, but I mean, I guess that's to be expected, I guess. You know, obviously coming back after not playing basketball in this way for a while, you would expect there may be a higher chance of injuries to actually pop up. And so hopefully, you know, it won't be too long. Obviously, Rondo's basically going to be out literally till like the Western Conference Finals, it seems like, because obviously we forget. It's only 3 months of like really the season that's going to happen here. Like once the games start, it's only 3 months. So, you know, it's like you get hurt, and even if you have a month and a half injury, that's literally half. If your team makes it that far, literally half the whole time you're there. It's not like you still have another 6 months to play. So, yeah, that's going to definitely be interesting. What do you think about the whole hotline, the snitch hotline,
the hotline that a couple of players have been using to talk about other players. Obviously, I don't know if you heard, they said Jimmy Butler was one of the people who was snitched on because he was apparently, I guess, working out too loud. And there was others. I believe there was a Dwight story that I saw that I guess he didn't bring a mask to something. And so someone called the hotline about that. And so what is your opinion on it? Because obviously players have came out and made statements saying, hey, don't be a snitch. Don't be ratting people out, et cetera, et cetera. And it's even raised the question, because some people are asking, would you snitch to win a championship and et cetera? So what are your thoughts on the whole hotline, everything that's going on?
Honestly, I think it's kind of dumb. I think some things obviously need to be called on. Like if you notice somebody's being sick or you notice somebody's showing symptoms and they're not talking about it, which is probably unlikely they get away with it anyway. Or if somebody's trying to sneak off and do something irresponsible that could jeopardize everything that's going on. Everybody's in there for one reason. So you jeopardize it all. They lose the money. They wasted all this time getting ready when they could have been doing other things. And all because a few people are trying to jeopardize it just to do them and be selfish. So it's not like I'm against the idea of having some sort of personal accountability via hotline. But a lot of the stuff that's been called on so far, besides the mask thing, haven't really been super related to coronavirus, I think. Like if Jimmy Butler's music's too loud and somebody's... it's basically, somebody's tattletaling. And I think it's kind of funny. I did find that people who keep calling out Chris Paul for it because what he did during the game, being rule violator, rule checker right there. So a lot of people have been keeping him keen to it. I remember when I was listening to Pop Smoke's album, and he put a skit in there that was basically talking about, sending people to prison for snitching. And I don't know, it just popped in my head when people were talking about this hotline. It's like, I get paid to snitch now, man. And this is some classified stuff. I really shouldn't be talking about this, but I mess with you because you're my boy. But don't mess with me. You see what I did to Holmes. You see what I did to Jimmy. You see 40 years.
It's funny because the one thing about the Jimmy Butler one, remember that beef he got into with, who was it? I think was it TJ Warren this year?
Yeah, I
don't Do you remember
know.
that?
I think so.
He got into a beef with TJ Warren this year, and they were saying that's probably who snitched on him. Because when you get beefs with players, sometimes they be just like, yeah, he probably snitched. He probably was waiting to get back at him for that. But yeah, I mean, like a lot of interesting. It's like I said, it's nothing crazy happening, but it's a lot of interesting things that you hear that happen in the bubble, which is obviously interesting. Obviously, the food was a big topic because have you seen pictures of the food that they've been served?
Yeah, I mean, like for NBA players who have been eating top of the line food when they want to, the ones that do care, only eat top of the line foods that help them renourish their bodies and all this. And they get thrown basically a Disney plate lunch. To them, that's like, what is this? To us regular people,
they get them Mickey Mouse waffles.
Right, and then clearly there are some meals that are better than others, and not all meals are equal in that place. Now, is it probably a good idea to complain about it publicly? Probably not. But to be honest, one, it probably would have been leaked out anonymously that players are complaining about certain things at the Disney thing. And you know how people get when rich people complain, especially rich athletes. So, yeah, you know what you were getting into if you complained about it. And most people haven't complained about it. And, everybody's on the John Morant wave because he said, I just eat ramen noodles, man. I'm young. I don't got money. Like, I never had this before. But, people do get accustomed to lifestyle. And I honestly feel like everybody else is just kind of seeing this as a weird camp. And they're just not allowed to do anything in it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they literally, I read something. They're literally bringing a chef, which I'll talk about later in the show, an extra chef out to Orlando to expand the food menu. So, I mean, I guess they noticed, all right, we ain't feeding these guys that good. And like you said, these are millionaires. These guys have personal chefs. These guys are eating, like you said, top of the line meals. and now they're getting fed, beef and shrimp in some Tupperware. It's a little different when you ain't used to doing what you're used to be doing. In other news, I'm sure you heard. I don't know if you have. Have you heard about Russell getting COVID-19, and that's why he has not joined the team yet? And do you think that could affect Houston moving forward? That Russell's not there currently, and we don't know when he's going to be there. Because I think James just got there. Do you think that could ruin the chemistry a little bit with the Houston Rockets?
No, I don't think it'll hurt chemistry. I think it'll be a little bit bad. It'll be harder to install new stuff, but honestly, I feel like they just need to. If Russell Westbrook is probably one of the most in shape, ready to go athletes at any time, athletes in the world, like at all. Period. His work ethic is crazy, so he'll be ready to play. Like, it won't be rust per se. Maybe it'll be small things that because you haven't been playing professional high level basketball really in the last 6 months. No, not 6 months, more like 4 months. That may cause some things. But as far as chemistry with the team, I mean, he's been with them for most of the year. I feel like the chemistry that they had already would be there anyway. It's not like it's not like they traded their whole team away and brought in a bunch of new guys. Like, it's different when, let's say, the Portland Trailblazers, half their roster just revived from the dead because they're all eligible to play now because their injuries were able to heal in a reasonable amount of time thanks to COVID-19. So the Trailblazers are like a whole different team, really. If you look at the roster top to bottom, that's a team that may have some chemistry stuff they have to work out, and everything may not be all well and good in the surface level. But for the most part, most of these teams were what they were before the trade deadline, and even afterwards, nothing really transpired. So,
yeah, I mean, that's true too. I mean, obviously, we've talked about before the Brooklyn Nets. Obviously, since literally their top 6-7 players are not coming because of COVID or injuries, and obviously Michael Beasley just got sent home. And he just got signed. So obviously, it's not that bad of a situation over in Houston or even with Portland either. So they probably would have the most chemistry issues out of every team in the league. And I guess the last thing I want to touch on is, do you see the potential or a possibility that during the bubble, do you see a player, not because of COVID, because he got it or anything, but do you see a player maybe just getting to a point and just saying, you know what? I can't do this anymore. Y'all, I'm going to go home. I'll see y'all later. Do you see that as a possibility? Because once some teams get eliminated in the regular season, we're going to hear a lot about this bubble experience. But do you see someone maybe leaving even during camp or the regular season?
Maybe. I think it just depends on where you see yourself in the offense and if, things happen. It may... I doubt it because you still want to make your money, but at the same time, you're already there. You already had to go through all of this. I don't see why you would just feel like you want to quit on it in the middle of the whole thing, unless there was some reasonable, like there was something reasonable, tangible to take away from it. So, of course, they can always just say, like, they don't feel comfortable in the bubble, but that affects everybody else. And unless you're selfish and you don't really care, either way, you're probably not going to try and jeopardize the whole thing for everybody else just to say because you don't want to be there anymore. So I don't think any athlete in the bubble would leave and just say, well, I just didn't feel comfortable. I mean, they have the right to say it, but then that raises the question, well, what's happening in the bubble? Who's doing bad things? What can you say? And then people are going to try and peer in. But honestly, the bubble is actually pretty actively viewed upon by the public. If you follow like guys like Malaeus Steibel, I think that's his name. He does a YouTube video every day of his experience in the bubble so far. So it's pretty good insight to see what's going on there. But I don't know. If people leave, they leave. I think it would look bad. Like it won't look the same way as like if somebody leaves Camp USA for the typical USA summer game stuff. It won't look like that. Because you can't say, oh, I just want to focus on next season, when it's not like you are up for contract or anything like that. Like, this is legit for a title, not for an Olympic medal that means nothing because it's not the Olympics. So it's kind of less like a camp and more of a camp progressive, like, a camp plus.
Yeah.
So it's different for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, we're still in the beginning stages. There's probably going to be more little stories coming out. People are going to still post more of their experiences. I mean, literally, I'm seeing JJ Redick, shotgunning beers already. So, I mean, they still have some stuff within the bubble. I see the NBA adjusting on the fly also, because before they didn't say the players could be on rides. Now they're saying, they might be on a few rides. It's just something I think you have to be adaptive and adjust to. And I think the NBA is doing that right now. We'll have to just see again how everything turns out and how everybody reviews the bubble at the end of the day. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Ethan, I'd like to thank you for coming on, giving your insight on the NBA bubble and everything that's going on. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to come on the show.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we had Ethan on the podcast giving his thoughts on the NBA bubble. Every story that we've already kind of discussed in the first part of the show, he gave his thoughts on. Really appreciate Ethan coming on here and giving his thoughts on it. Always love it when he can give his NBA insight as well. It's funny, actually, after we got off the phone, he was talking to me about the Zion situation, because obviously, as you know, he's a Pelicans fan. And he talked about how this is going to be all right and Zion's going to be back soon. I was like, all right, man, I got you. So, like I said, really appreciate Ethan joining the show, taking time out of his busy schedule to join us here on the podcast. We're going to try to work to get some other people on the podcast as well, so you definitely want to stay tuned for that in future episodes with me. So now we're going to hop back into the list that the Ringer had created for the 7 most intriguing players returning, and we're going to finish this list, and we're also going to try to get into some other news before we get out of here for the show. So next player on the list, Joe King Noah, baby. Yes, sir. Joe King Noah. Remember, the defensive stopper from Chicago that all of us remember with the Derrick Rose years, But continuing on in the article, everything goes according to plan. Noah, now 35 years old, long removed from his prime as the charging heart and soul of the Bulls, won't see a lot of floor time for the Clips. He'll be an emergency center behind young starter Zubac, at least scary name in the LA lineup, but quietly an important, awfully part of it, and 6th Man of the Year candidate Montrezl Harrell. The hypergenic and high-impact small ball 5, who's the first big off Doc Rivers' bench and likely one of his 5 closers in crunch time, ideally Noah will mop up for in a few minutes here and there, provide sage counseling on the dark art of interior defense to a 23-year-old Zubac, and lead cheers from a socially distanced bench. Should the need arise, though, against an opponent with a dangerous big like Anthony Davis or Nikola Jokic, Noah proved last season in Memphis that he's still capable of contributing when called upon. In 42 points and 42 appearances with the Grizzlies, Joe averaged better than 15 points, 12 rebounds, and 4 assists per 36 minutes of floor time, and looked significantly quicker and healthier on the court than he ever did at any point during his 2 disastrous seasons in New York. Obviously, as you know, the Clips signed Noah to a 10-day deal. So obviously that was before league play was suspended. So obviously when they came back with the restart, they had to decide were they going to now sign him officially. And obviously, since they opened up 2 more spots, it would make sense to keep a veteran interior presence like Joakim Noah on your team to help add to that leadership that, you can never have too much of. So obviously, you got him healthy. And obviously, remember, he had a September Achilles injury last year. So obviously, this gave him a chance to get even more healthier from that Achilles. So obviously, that helped him out as well. So, we'll have to see how Noah actually goes and how actually Noah is when he gets there, because, Noah is a guy who, like I said, may not get a lot of time for the Clippers this season in this restart, but definitely is someone who can come in there if needed. And I think that's the biggest thing. When they need him showing up will be probably one of the most important and biggest things that will happen. Because, you can never doubt and never underestimate veteran experience. But, continuing on in the list, Marvin Bagley III from the Kings is their 5th most important, or actually 6th most intriguing player. And continue with the article. A broken thumb, followed by a left foot sprain and subsequent soreness, have limited Bagley to just 13 appearances in his sophomore season. The number 2 overall draft pick of the 2018 draft hasn't taken the court since January 20th, further complicating the already difficult matter of figuring out how Bagley fits into the offensive ecosystem built around Lightning point guard De'Aaron Fox, and how Sacramento can best deploy Bagley on defense where the team has hemorrhage points with him on the floor. The issue to this point is that Bagley has looked like neither a fish nor foul sort of tweener on the floor. When he plays power forward, he doesn't shoot the ball well enough, just 34% outside the paint to his career, to force defense to respect him as a stretch 4. And when he slides up to the 5, he's neither an imposing presence nor a possession-ending rim protector. Opponents shot 67% at the basket in Bagley at center minutes last season, and 68.4% this season, ghastly bottom of the league caliber marks. Despite Bagley's strong counting stats of 14.8 points a game and 7.45 rebounds in 25 minutes on 49% shooting, the Kings have largely performed better with either Belinka or Harrison Barnes at the 4, and with surprise linchpin Rashad Holmes at the 5, than Bagley manning either spot. But considering Kings Vice President of Basketball Operations picked Bagley 2nd overall in a draft that saw Luka, Jaren Jackson, and Trae Young go with the next 3 choices, it's not like Coach Duke Walton was going to just have a mothball of a healthy Bagley as the team looks to build a paramount playoff contender for the years to come. Obviously, the front court is very crowded in Sacramento, if you forget, because don't forget about, of all the players we've already mentioned, they still have Jabari Parker and Alex Len as well, even though they have tested positive for COVID-19. And don't forget, Holmes was one of the players who had to be put back in quarantine because of the fact that he accidentally stepped over the line trying to get a DoorDash deal. So, obviously, we'll have to see. Bagley and Henry Giles are probably going to get tons of reps because of this, probably because of the fact that Rashad Holmes got into that kind of trouble. And, we'll have to see how it goes. Because, listen, the Kings are in a situation where, again, they're one of the teams that are not really expected to make the playoffs or get into that spot. But it'll just be interesting to see what these guys do. Obviously, they haven't reached somewhat, some people would say, the expectations that were expected of them. The expectations, and this was actually very interesting to me, and we'll have to see what happens with the Kings, because they're definitely a very intriguing team in my opinion in terms of what's going to happen moving forward. And then the last player on this list that they say is very intriguing coming back for the restart is Justice Winslow of the Memphis Grizzlies. I love in this article, continuing, I love the Grizzlies' move to pick up Winslow at the trade deadline. Now that he's finally healed up from a lower back bone bruise that kept him on the injured list since early November, I'm really eager to see how he'll perform in a Memphis uniform, and how first-year head coach Taylor Jenkins will use a 6'6", 225-pound skeleton key who has different points in his 5 careers, served as a perimeter stopper, a pretty good point guard, and a small ball center who started at Game 7. His versatility is going to come out in their style of play, Jenkins recently said. That's why I talk about him being a great fit and a perfect fit for a system, because he can play multiple positions on the offensive end. In theory, Winslow could just be what the doctor ordered for a starting lineup that fell off dramatically after losing Jay Crowder, with non-shooter Kyle Allen stepping into Crowder's spot along John Morant, Jarrett Jackson Jr., Jonas Valanciunas, Dylan Brooks. The Grizzlies' new look starting five absolutely cratered, scoring a putrid 76.5 points per 100 possessions and a disastrous 5-game sample before Jackson suffered a knee sprain. Winslow isn't exactly Ray Allen, but he's worked on his shot over the years, hitting 37.7% of his long balls over the last full 2 seasons in Miami, and perhaps just more importantly, attempting nearly 5 per 36 minutes of floor time in 2018-2019, much more than Slow-Mo, who secretly ever looks at the rim behind the arc. So, I think that's interesting because, Kellen Winslow is a guy. He's a good player. He can play well. He definitely is a guy to me who can do a lot of things for a team. And I think you have to look at him and you have to definitely see that he can bring a lot to the table. And I think that Kellen Winslow will help this young Memphis team. It kind of fits into the mold of the Memphis Grizzlies, of all of them being young players. And it only helps them just all come together, really, and just continue this youth movement that they've been continuing and they've been doing and helping them move forward. So, it's to me, it's very interesting to see what's going to happen with Memphis and Kellen Winslow. Obviously, Memphis is trying to hold on to that 8th spot in the Western Conference, so they're definitely going to try to do everything they can to get themselves up to speed and back to where they were, and that way they can potentially keep that 8th spot and then go into the first round and play whoever the number 1 seed in the West will be. And that was all the article from The Ringer. But now we're going to get to some quick NBA stories before we get out of here. For this story, the NBA flew executive chef Sean Loving to the campus to expand the food menu after complaints about the food inside the NBA's bubble in Orlando, Florida. The league is trying to provide more options for its players. According to Joe Verdon of The Athletic, the NBA flew in executive chef Sean Loving to Walt Disney World campus to consult on expanding the menu, including those for dietary restrictions. Loving has worked for a chef for Team USA and the Detroit Pistons. This comes after numerous complaints from the players from some who posted their food on social media. Because obviously, the food they've had hasn't necessarily been the best or been a lot or been the greatest. And so obviously some players have complained and not really been very satisfied with what they've been getting. The food has been great help for me trying to cut a few pounds, and it's been fitting in right in with that plan, so it's all good. Toronto Raptors head coach Nick Nurse joked about. Tyson Chandler said, "I haven't had a favorite meal yet," who has had a limited selection due to dietary restrictions. Once each player ends his initial quarantine, they'll be able to order from nearby restaurants or hire a private chef while they're in the bubble. So obviously, like I said, we've talked about the food. The food has been talked about multiple times. It's not the most enticing thing in the world all the time, but it's something that I'm glad they're trying to improve. Because obviously, listen, all these players have been trying to, eat a certain way all year round, and coming to this bubble, if they have to change it, you don't know how that could affect them. You don't know how that could affect them on the court. Not eating the same way they've been able to eat, not being able to be feeding themselves the same way they've been able to feed, and everything. So I think it's very important that, they are able to eat what they want to eat and eat it the way they want to eat it, so that way they can keep themselves up so they can be the best they can be on a day in and day out basis. And then we're going to get to this last story before we get out of here. Why NBA players and coaches are confident the bubble is working. We're going to get into this article. About a week into the NBA's Great Disney World experience, the league is beginning to get indication of how miraculously crafted bubble is going to work. Despite a few hiccups in its structure, has thus remained far intact. And in fact, those speed bumps are showing that an extensive set of safety protocols the league and player union put up in place to starve off the coronavirus are working exactly as intended. Monday was the first news-heavy day on the testing front since 22 teams involved in the NBA restart arrived in Florida. Houston Rockets superstar didn't travel with the team and later announced on social media he posted positive for COVID-19 before the team's departure. 2 players, obviously Houston and Sacramento's players, were revealed to have broken mandatory quarantine, and that's why they're all quarantining again. Most significantly, the NBA and NBAPA announced the first round of tests from last week. Just 2 out of 322 players tested positive, and those 2 positives players still showed up while they were in quarantine, and both players were secretly removed from the campus to isolate. The whole thing seems precarious, and it is. The NBA is attempting to put the season back together in a state that has become the pandemic American hotbed. Even though there are plenty of rules to keep the NBA personnel insulated, the 113 pages of them to be exact, there is a real possibility everything falls apart sometime in the next 3 months before the NBA can crown a champion. And I'm not going to finish the rest of the article, but basically, as you can tell, listen, I think the players feel like, listen, this is the best we can do, and right now I have no complaints. We're doing what we can do. I think we're moving forward, and I think we're getting closer to the goal that we want to reach here. So at the end of the day, as long as there's not an outbreak and there's not a spread within the bubble, I think for the most part they will say that everything is a success. And I think that's how it should be. So there you go right there. That was our show. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Thank you for tuning in once again. Appreciate you coming in, giving us a chance to be a part of your day and letting me be a part of your day, giving you some basketball update, talking about the sport we all love together. Don't forget to follow us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Also, don't forget to listen to our other amazing podcasts here at the GSMC Podcast Network. So again, Brice signing out. Thank you and have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.